Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a peaceful day because today we're stepping into a story where peace is only an illusion. A girl escapes to the countryside hoping for safety, but what she finds is far from it. Strange faces, creeping fear, and a silence that hides something darker. Stay with us as we unravel this quiet nightmare. And if this story keeps you hooked, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. Pale dawn light filtered through the rotting wooden slats of a tiny thatched roof house nestled deep in the mountain forest. In the stillness, Tukai stirred awake, her eyes vacant, like a wind-glazed lake, motionless and devoid of ripples. Delicate tendrils of morning chill crept over her skin as she sat up slowly. Her trembling feet touched the cold dirt floor. She rose unsteadily, her heart pounding with a question that seemed to echo in the empty space. Who am I? Fleeting fragments of memory passed through her mind. Unknown faces, piercing screams, slashing at her consciousness like sharp blades. She pressed her hands to her temples, pain surging as though it wanted to cleave her thoughts in two. The simple dwelling, redolent of kitchen smoke and damp earth, was all she had to anchor herself. But no matter how familiar it felt, it offered no clue, no answer to the question of her past. Tukai gripped her fists tightly, determined to forge ahead despite the fear. She went about her chores, sweeping the yard, stoking the fire, wiping the table, each repetitive motion a defense against the panic crowding her mind. It wasn't duty, but survival. Keeping herself busy meant she wouldn't collapse into fear's void. Every deed was a small rebellion against the emptiness threatening to swallow her. Yet the horrifying images refused to dissipate. They lingered like ghosts, haunting every quiet moment, pulling her between two worlds, the forest's serene reality and the chaotic nightmare of her half-remembered past. Footsteps sounded along the forest's footpath. Ong Tam and Ba Tam Hoa returned. Their silhouettes fell long on a red earth. Their familiar, gentle presence felt as enduring as these mountains themselves. Tuki looked up, and her expression softened a bit at Ba Tam's warm smile and the basket of dewy greens she carried, though the weight within her chest remained heavy. Seeing Ba Tam eased the loneliness palely inside her. Inside the house, they began arranging medicinal herbs for Ong Tam's journey. Clusters of fragrant dried leaves were neatly placed on the old wooden table. With his low, steady voice, Ong Tam cautioned, "Make sure to lock the door tight. Don't open it after dark." Despite its simplicity, his voice carried a chill that touched Tuki's spine. A sense of something lurking beyond daylight crept into her awareness. She continued wrapping herbs, hands quivering slightly, trying to dissemble her fear. Ba Tam noticed. Her hand gently rested on Tukai's shoulder. No words were needed. Her gaze conveyed what she felt. "You belong to our family." For a fleeting moment, Tukai felt a comforting warmth fill her chest, but it vanished as quickly as it had come. Memories returned, nameless faces, staccato flashes of sensation, hammering at her mind like the waves that relentlessly assault the shore. Light filtered in through the trees, dancing across the yard. It cast patterns on the ground, but failed to dispel the darkness shadowing Tuki's spirit. She watched Ong Tam pack his bag for his journey, his hunched silhouette weighed down as though carrying the burdens of the mountains themselves. Her gratitude mixed with dread. She feared her presence might be a burden, an unknown variable that could disrupt the fragile balance. The aroma of wood smoke mingled with the scent of pumpkin greens as Tuki and Batam prepared dinner. While slicing vegetables by the window, Tuki's gaze drifted across the golden fields glimmering in the late afternoon sun. Together, they made their way to the fields, their steps light on soft earth. Batam's laughter fluttered like a breeze, gentle enough to lift some of the heaviness from Tuki's heart, but not enough to dispel the lingering dread. Like shadows waiting to emerge once light faded. By the time they reached home again, dusk had stained the sky red. Unexpectedly, a young man appeared, panting as he hurriedly asked a villager for directions to Ongtam's house. Later, at night, he returned and stood at Tuki's door. Tall and thin, his gaze felt frigid. "Where's Ongtam?" His voice was abrupt, sharp as a blade. Learning that Ongtam was away, he left, but his words lodged in Tuki's chest like a hidden wound. Batam grasped Tuki's hand, trying to soothe her fear. Yet her own eyes betrayed her uncertainty. The kitchen filled with the clinking of dishes, their sounds amplified by a hollow silence that lay between them. Tuki stared at the plate of eggs and greens before her. Her heart trembled like surface ripples on disturbed water. Why did he come here? The question churned in her mind. Outside, cold wind rustled dry branches. She squeezed Batam's hand and forced a smile, but it was fragile, as if made of mist. Night descended, and the innocence of their home dissolved into something darker, fear, shapeless and brooding, like a predator lurking, waiting to strike. The next morning, a pale light filtered through mountain mist. Batam fed the pigs, the pig trough clinking softly in the stillness. Tukai stood nearby, her gaze distant as though carried away by memory. Her wounded leg throbbed painfully beneath her clothes. "Your leg isn't healed," Batam said, worried, nodding her voice. "You should stay behind." Tukai gave a faint, stubborn smile. "I'll be fine. I want to come." They set off up the mountain path to gather firewood. A woven bamboo basket rattled on Batam's shoulder as they climbed the uneven trail. Each step seemed an ordeal for Tuki, but the crisp mountain air felt like a balm to her restless mind. As they labored, Batam quietly recounted stories from long ago. Her voice was like cool water, soothing, but it couldn't conceal the worry still etched in her eyes about the stranger from the night before. Tukai listened, feeling like a forest bracing itself before a storm, calm, yet under tension. Suddenly, fragments of memory stormed in again, obscure faces, flashes of violence, sounds she didn't fully process. She squeezed Batam's hand, seeking warmth, structure, reassurance. Birds sang around them, but to Tukai, every chirp seemed startled, anxious. Batam paused and looked at her with both love and caution. "Be careful," she said quietly, like a warning prophecy. Tukai nodded, though her heart felt heavy, like a stone rolling down a mountainside she couldn't stop. Soon, the forest canopy rustled with the arrival of several village children, their voices shrill with alarm. "Grandma broke her leg!" Tukai's heart seized, but she dropped everything and darted after Batam through thick underbrush. The old woman was sprawled in an agony, her face contorted with pain, her leg bleeding, eyes pleading for help. Tukai knelt beside her, hands trembling yet determined as she applied clean cloth and bandages that Batam handed her. The mingled scents of blood and earth brought a shock of recognition. Something in Tuki's body tensed. She felt an echo of her own vulnerabilities. Batam directed the children to help carry the old woman. Her voice was firm and steady, as solid as a mountain rock. Tukai squeezed the injured woman's hand, passing along a spark of comfort. In that moment, her heart flared, a small but determined flame, both wanting to save and fearing the darkness within herself. Together, they carried the old woman back to the village. Their pace was slow and heavy, but purposeful. Sunlight pierced the treetops, illuminating sweat-streaked faces, determination mingling with fatigue. Tukai looked at Batam, seeing steadiness in her eyes, like a lighthouse guiding ships through storm. When the old woman was finally safe in her home, Tuki exhaled. Relief washed over her, but shadows lingered. Although her act had dispelled some internal darkness, the memory of the stranger hung over her mind like a specter. They returned home, fatigued yet lightened, like birds returning to their roost after a tempest. But deep inside, Tuki understood that a greater storm still approached. Dusk crept around the house once more. No sooner had Tuki and Batam stepped through the door than the sound of furious pounding began. Two young men stood beyond it, their stance aggressive, the moonlight framing them like phantoms. "Where's Tom? Give us the medicine!" they shouted and splintered the wooden door frame with their fists. Tuki shrank behind Batam, her heart racing as though trapped in an iron cage. "He isn't here," Batam replied, voice quavering but resolute. The men delivered cold threats and left, but their words echoed in the air, heavy as falling stones. A child came later, breathless, handing Batam a letter written in messy handwriting. The note touched upon Tuki's origins. Batam's hands trembled as she read, eyes wide with fear. Tukai watched her, realizing her heart felt like a fracturing lake. Anxieties rippled across her mind. They moved swiftly toward the police station under the lengthening shadows along the dirt road. Inside, pale yellow light illuminated Tuki's stressed face. She recounted the intimidation, her voice hitching as if fleeing the ghosts of her own past. Batam held her hand, trying to anchor her. Police officers took notes and promised to investigate, but Tuki felt that danger remained close, like a wolf that had only briefly recalled its prey. They left the station and walked home under a stark moon. Though their steps were measured, an ember of fear glowed inside Tuki, a flame she feared could never be fully extinguished. Morning light filtered through drifting mist to bathe the small house. Tuki sat motionless at the table, exhaustion etched on her face. The echoes of the previous day's threats still hovered around her like dark clouds. Batam prepared tea. Steam curled through the silent kitchen. The air was thick with tension, a heaviness that no cup of tea could swallow. A gentle knock sounded. Two officers entered, their calm voices offering a gentleness that felt almost alien in that atmosphere. They sat and began methodically questioning about the break-in. Pens scratched on paper as each question revived Tukai's unease. She responded with measured dignity, voice soft but firm, like grass standing resilient after a gale. Batam added further details, her tone full of sorrow and concern. The officers nodded and assured them protection. Their words, though small, stirred a rebirth of fragile hope, like a cool breeze after stifling heat. Tukai looked again toward the gate, where sunlight fell across the dirt path. Yet inside, her heart felt tangled, like a bird without a nest. When the officers left, their footsteps echoed off the wood floor. Silence reclaimed the home. Tuki and Batam exchanged a quiet glance, as though two travelers lost in a desert recognized each other's shared confusion. They resumed their chores, but now every sound, the rooster's crow, the wind in the eaves, made Tukai flinch. Their sanctuary felt as fragile as paper walls against an oncoming storm.
Được một cặp vợ chồng già sống lâu trong rừng du mang. Dù không nói được, cô dần tìm thấy sự bình yên trong căn nhà mộc mạc lặng lẽ ấy. Tự kỳ, một cô gái trẻ bị thương, được một cặp vợ chồng già sống lâu trong rừng cưu mang. Dù không nói được, cô vẫn dần tìm thấy sự yên bình trong căn nhà mộc mạc lặng lẽ ấy. Nhưng sự yên ổn chẳng kéo dài bao lâu. Một đêm, tiếng chuông điện thoại vang lên phá vỡ bầu không khí tĩnh mịch, và cô nhận ra rằng ai đó từ quá khứ kinh hoàng của mình vẫn đang theo dõi cô, gần hơn cô từng nghĩ. Một người đàn ông bí ẩn xuất hiện trước cửa, ánh mắt lạ lùng của hắn khiến cô run lẩy bẩy tận đáy lòng. Nhưng bên trong cô, điều gì đó bắt đầu thay đổi. Cô không còn là cô gái yếu đuối. Tử kỳ bắt đầu lột xác. Cô cảm nhận từng cơn bão chưa hề tan, mà mới chỉ quay trở lại. Và lần này cô sẽ không gục ngã. Nơi từng là chốn chữa lành giờ